So now we're looking at section 2 of the listening. So this is typically in IELTS like a speech or sort of giving information about something. So in this case, it's information about the language center. So hopefully you should have already taken a look through and tried to give your own answers. So let's go through and pick out where the key information is. So the first section of questions is they're asking you to answer question 11 and question 12. So what should you do when you hear a fire alarm? And then what will the students do next? Have a break at 10:30 or do a test after lunch. So the first one, quite simple, that if you hear a fire alarm, you should follow a member of staff. That's quite straightforward. In the answer, they say you should follow your teacher or a member of staff. So you're listening out for those key words. Question 12, they try and trick you a little bit with the answer. So let's just listen and see what they say.
So after I've given you this information, you can have a break, and then at 10:30, you can come back here and do a test for 1 hour. So
he says you can have a break, and then at 10:30, you come back here and do a test for 1 hour, okay? So they say have a break, but then come back at 10:30. So we're not taking a break at 10:30. Our break finishes at 10:30, and then we're going to do a test. So the answer should be C. You'll do a test at 10:30. Okay. So that's 11 and 12, and then we move on to the writing answers. So we're listening for who is Mrs. Greenwood, and what should you do when you're sick. So it's quite straightforward for Mrs. Greenwood. She's told that she's the director of studies. Okay, so they give it first before her name. So they say, come back here to meet the director of studies, Mrs. Greenwood. So it's one of the things where you've got to be paying attention during the test, because if you're just listening for Mrs. Greenwood, you might hear it but not remember the words that came before it. Okay, so they're trying to sort of trick you. Rather than saying Mrs. Greenwood, director of studies, to make it easy for you, they've swapped the order. Director of studies, Mrs. Greenwood. Okay, so that's why one thing to practice for the IELTS is listening and paying attention all the way through. Because sometimes what weaker candidates will do is you're just listening for the key word and then what comes after the key word, all right? That's the kind of thing they teach you to do in high school. But what you really need to be doing for IELTS is paying attention and listening and understanding the whole thing as it goes through. Okay, because if I'm just listening for Greenwood as my key word, afterwards I've already missed Director of Studies because it came before her name, okay? So it's just a case of being able to practice, and it's literally a practice thing with the listening, where you're listening and becoming skilled at listening all the way through. And then the next one is quite straightforward, where they say, if you're ill, please phone or email the school, giving us your name, student number, and the reason you're not coming to school. Student number and reason. Okay, so that would be okay to write for your answer. And then very simple, they say there's going to be a test every Friday with a revision on Thursday. Okay, so they literally say in the answer, you'll be doing a test each Friday. Okay, so it's a testing that you know when they say test each Friday, that you also mean test every Friday. Okay, so you should be able to be listening to that. That was relatively straightforward. Okay, so then we get into the next section where it's more multiple choice. So you've got to pick out the 3 things that students are allowed to do after their lessons. So let's forward and listen to what they say, because this one is a slightly more difficult section.
Some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now, listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
In the school, we have a language laboratory on the ground floor where you can practice your listening, as well as a self-access center on the second floor for you to use after your lessons. These are open from 3:30 until 5 p.m. every day, except Friday. We also have a small library on the first floor, which stocks plenty of grammar books and some reading material. However, there is a local library open to the public just across the road on the corner of East Street and Bickley Way. There will be a small fee if you want to join the local library.
Okay, so that was sort of gave you the answers quite straight up, but it was the key word you're listening for is what can you do after your lessons, okay? So they did the similar thing that they did before, where they said you can practice your listening. They gave you the keyword in the answer before they gave you the keyword in the question after your lessons. So they said, we have a language laboratory where you can practice your listening as well as a self-access center for you to use after your lessons. Okay, so they did the same trick where they gave you the keyword from the answer first and then the keyword from the question second. Okay, so they're trying to catch you out and confuse you when they do that. Okay, so the first two that comes relatively quickly. And now what's challenging about this question is that we have a sort of longer section about the excursions every weekend. Okay, but this is where you have to do your critical thinking and like logical skills, where the question is saying, what are 3 things you can do after your lessons? Okay, the weekend, do you have lessons on the weekend? No, you have lessons Monday to Friday. Okay, so when they talk about everything, they talk about what you do every weekend is not relevant because it's what you can do after your lesson. Okay, so they talk a lot about these excursions. So that's when they talk about excursions to museums in London. They talk about Leeds Castle. They try and catch you out by using these keywords in the next paragraph, in the next section of the listening. But obviously it's on the weekend, so none of it is relevant to the question. Okay, and then they get on to this next part of the answer where they talk about clubs as well as the weekend excursions. Okay, we have some clubs which run after lessons. Okay, so that's our key phrase that we're listening for. They say they have a football club, a reading club, a photography, and a martial arts club. Okay, so what can we do after lessons? We can take part in a club, right? So that's the key skill they're asking you to listen for the difference between talking about things you can do on the weekend and talking about things you can do after lessons. Okay, and clubs take part after lessons. These museum excursions take place on the weekends. All right, so that's what they're testing for you to listen for. So let's take a look at the final 2 answers, question 19 and 20. So they're going to give you some advice. What are the things you have to do as a student? So let's forward a little bit and listen to see what advice they give us.
To make new friends and meet students who are possibly in different classes from yours. So, as you know, our school is in a great location, not far from central London. You can get there either by bus, and the bus stop is just opposite the school, or you can go by train. Remember, if you are going to central London, please check the times of the trains coming back, as there aren't late trains. There is.
Okay, so they used the keyword here opposite, but they talked about the bus stop, okay? The train from opposite the school. Is it the train that's opposite the school? No, he said bus. The bus stop is opposite the school. Then he says, remember, if you are going to central London, please check the times of the trains coming back, okay? So the return trains back from London, okay? So what does that mean? Is it departing from London or departing from Bickley Hill? It means it's departing from London, okay? Because it's saying check the times of the trains coming back, i.e. the times of the trains leaving London to come back to Bickley Hill, okay? So checking train departure times should be your answer here. And then let's listen to the rest of it.
Is a night bus, but we don't recommend traveling late at night with this means of transport. It is safer to book a cab, but be sure to check that it is a reputable company. When you are out, take care of your possessions. It's not necessary to take a passport with you, and please don't carry lots of cash. Hang on to your mobile phone.
Okay, so he says quite clearly, what else does he advise students to do? Well, he advises them not to take the night bus, but that's not one of our options that we have available. And he also says it's not necessary to take a passport with you. Okay, so it's quite clearly, do not take a passport. Okay, so the other piece of advice he gives about the bus isn't one of our options, so we should ignore that. Although in reality, speaking as someone who used to live in London, I can also advise you taking night buses is not always the best way to get where you're going. And I would agree and say it's better to book a taxi. As someone who had to take the night bus a lot, that's just a piece of advice from me to you. Okay, so that was section 2.